Hey guys, welcome to the Cutting Edge podcast where culture meets crypto. Today on the podcast, we have the co-creator of Seed Club, an incubator for tokenized communities. Started as a DAO, Seed Club is a growing family of creators, mentors, and operators building the future of community. Since its inception less than a year ago, Seed Club has successfully completed 3 cohorts, helping 36 projects to their path to decentralization. Please welcome Jess Sloss. Jess, how you doing?
I am great. Really excited to be here speaking with you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for taking the time. I know it's a busy holiday week and you guys are in the middle of a token launch. So, I very much appreciate you taking the time.
We're always in the middle of a token launch, so it's what
Okay.
we're up to.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess let's start with for those viewers that aren't very familiar with what Seed Club is and what you guys do, why don't you give us like a description of Seed Club and then like how kind of you ended up in the space and founding Seed Club.
Yeah, so C Club, I think the introduction you gave us was great. I think the shorthand people used to describe us is like the Y Combinator of Web3 or of community DAOs. Just over a year ago, I think we saw a few tools coming together that were giving communities new superpowers that only companies would have had in the past. So the ability to align incentives, reward each other, have a cap table, have a bank account, essentially resource and ultimately have an ownership stake in a community on the internet. And so we started C Club as first a place of learning, but it's quickly evolved into a growing accelerator of projects. So we run cohorts a few times a year. We just finished up recruiting for our last cohort, and we'll be kicking off our next one at the beginning of 2022. And we help the best projects, best communities figure out how to use tokens to unlock these new superpowers. We've worked with projects like Krause House, which is a team that's on a mission to buy and operate an NBA sports franchise. Water and Music, which is figuring out how to use tokens to aid research as it relates to the music business. And Cabin DAO, which is really trying to build out a new decentralized city through these cabin pods structured throughout North America and eventually the world, and a whole host of others. So we're really excited about how community and tokens intersect, and hopefully giving the power and opportunity for individuals to earn more of the value they create on the internet rather than the platforms themselves.
Oh, awesome. I think that's been a great explanation. And how did you get into
Hmm.
how did you get into crypto and ultimately social tokens?
So I was really early into social media. I saw the value of decentralized, or I guess more democratized distribution, being able to build a community and have one-on-one or one-to-many directional communication with a community or an audience was groundbreaking. I think when Facebook and Twitter and YouTube launched. But then I quickly saw that the downsides of those being centralized entities. And so organic reach on Facebook and Instagram and even YouTube being decreased, and instead, the need to buy advertisements and when you look at the world, I think we're moving through this big transition from the traditional firm or the physical world to the digital one, where these networks that are coordinating our economic activity are incredibly powerful. And it really started to make me uncomfortable to see how centralized entities would be able to start squeezing revenue out instead of really leaning into the huge, I think, potential that could come from democratized ownership of those networks. And so when a friend sent me a message saying, "Hey, have you heard about tokens?" I went down the rabbit hole pretty hard. I bought Ethereum so I could get into the first DAO, but luckily wasn't technical enough to actually put my tokens into that DAO. And then got pulled back into the hype at the early part of 2017. Worked on an early security token issuance at the end of 2017. Learned a lot of lessons from that, and I've been working within the space over the last 4 years, up until founding Seed Club in the beginning of the summer of 2020.
Awesome. I think of you when I think of social tokens, I obviously think of Seed Club, and I think of you because I think you are a big thought leader in the space. And one of the comments I made a couple of weeks ago on another podcast, I think like it definitely makes sense to go into that, right? Because I want to definitely hear your point of view, and I am also an investor in Seed Club, so I obviously trust your opinion and value it. So I would love to have this discussion with you, and it's something that I think we've had it off air, but like for sure, like to have it on air, I think would be very helpful for everyone. So like I'll just start with my version of it, or my thoughts on social tokens, and I'd love to hear yours as a rebuttal. And so, kind of like I say it because me as a creator, as I'm trying to build a community around, let's say gmoney, and I thought a lot about how do I go about building it, right? Do I want to do an ERC20? Do I want to do NFTs to kind of build that community? And the reason why I've taken my time is because I want to make sure and do it right, because I know it's something that's going to be long term. But more importantly is when you do an ERC20, I find that there's like an incentive misalignment, right? Is that like at the beginning, when let's say the token is priced the least, I have the most, and then I sell a percentage of that. And then over time, as I monetize, I have less of a stake in the community. But then obviously, as there's more community members, they want, number go up for the most part, right? Like to build that community. And so like I feel like there's a lot of misalignment in like a social token built that way, like through an ERC20. Whereas I personally think that NFTs, the good thing about them, right, is like I would be incentivized as a creator to create as much value for them long term because I'm getting a percentage of royalties like in perpetuity, right? So like to me, that's kind of the way I think about it when I'm trying to design my community. So I would love to hear your thoughts around that issue.
Yeah, I think I replied to a comment on that clip, and I think there's a lot of nuance to the discussion, and probably a few places we could dive in. I think that I took most exception with I think the lack of nuance in the answer that was given before, and also one of the points I think your guest made around legality, which I think is always just an important thing to highlight when we're in this crypto space, is that tokens can be made to do all sorts of things, and we need to be very thoughtful about how we structure these, regardless of whether they're NFTs or fungible tokens. But yeah, I think like listen, it's probably helpful to think through the taxonomy of social tokens to a degree, because there are so many different use cases here, and each different use case probably requires a different way of thinking about it. So I think of a social token as like the meta category, and underneath those social tokens, you'd have creator or personal tokens. So let's say personal tokens, creator tokens, and community tokens. And I think what we focus on at Seed Club, I think, is based on some of the insights that you have as well, that fungible tokens, social tokens, are actually best used by communities, and it's more complicated and maybe not quite as useful for individual creators. And that might seem obvious, but it also gets kind of complex as you think through that, like ultimately what you're trying to build is a community around you, right? And so, yeah, I think largely I agree. NFTs. So when we look at tokens, we look at tokens across the board. We think how can we empower these communities with tokens in some way? And then what are the right formats of those tokens, of structures of those tokens to actually create the most amount of value? And I think for individual creators, if you're a YouTuber, if you're building up a personality of a pixelated ape on the internet, NFTs are a wonderful place to start, and maybe the only social tokens that you need. They provide an opportunity to generate revenue for the creator or into a community. They provide an on-chain ownership graph, so you can do all sorts of cool things like getting content and giving new experiences. They have all the powers that a token could give. Where it becomes a challenge, though, is like, okay, well, what happens when you actually want to expand that community from it being like a fan club, like I want to be the value that's being created for these tokens is purely based on you, the creator, to one where the community is truly leaning in and creating most of that value. And I think that's where fungible tokens, social tokens, community tokens really create a lot of opportunity. And why you see so many folks leaning into, I think, the trend of DAOs, is because fungible tokens are great at rewarding more nuanced contributions. They're great at tying into the broader DeFi ecosystem that's out there. They're great at giving more granular voting control and power within these organizations. And so if a true community is the idea of people coming together and creating many-to-many connections and value in a many-to-many way, a fungible token is really, I think, what most communities will ultimately end up in. All that said, most of the communities we're working with right now are on some path towards that. And so NFTs are a tool that we use very often. You can look at the drop we did recently with Pool Suite, where Pool Suite dropped a membership card. There's a lot more plans with that project, but it's a really great way to first get people on board, give them a sense of ownership, give them a sense of say, start to unlock some of the Web3 interactions that the team over there is really excited to bring out. So it's like, at what point do you believe that you're truly trying to, I guess the term, exit to community, or at least empower community to create value together? And I think that's really when fungible tokens start to make sense. I also think there's some interesting dynamics with regards to NFTs where, while I agree you sort of have this weird balance with, let's say, a creator coin where you have most of it early on and you sort of have less of it later on, you kind of end up in a similar situation with NFTs where you're kind of diluting your initial holders as you try to drive more revenue. So I don't think it's as clear a path as maybe it was outlined previously. And why we're so excited and why we sort of structured Seed Club in the way that we have. So there's nuance, there's a bunch of levers. I feel like it reminds me of playing Myst, for those of you that are old enough to play Myst, where you're kind of running around and you pull a lever and all of a sudden two other things happen and you need to make sure you do things in the right order. There's a lot of that sort of figuring out that goes into actually designing a token. And that's what we get excited about.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's a lot to unpack there. One is My first question is, I guess, have you found that with the projects you've been working with, where I guess people have been starting with NFTs, kind of like Pool Suite? And I guess for those in the audience that aren't very familiar with Pool Suite, can you explain exactly, what they're doing and like what that project is? Because I know there was definitely a lot of anticipation around it.
Yeah, I can share with Pool Suite, but I don't want to speak to too many
Okay.
specifics there. I
Okay.
can speak more generally to
Okay. Cool.
a game plan that we're seeing rolling out. But so Pool Suite is, it's an online brand, and I wouldn't even call it a community, though there's definitely a community there. It's this ultra leisure brand, an internet ultra leisure brand, and we helped work with Marty and team on doing a membership card drop a few weeks back that sold 2,500 NFTs at zero point 0.1 ETH, so $2 million or so at the time. And Marty had been building this project for 7 years with a team of amazing designers, impeccable designers. It's like an incredible experience, I guess, brand world that they've built, but they haven't generated any revenue from it over 7 years. And so, the message he sent me afterwards was like, can you imagine, look what we did with no money over 7 years. Can you imagine what we're going to do with $2 million? And that just gets, ridiculously exciting. But really the goal there was, how do we get initial ownership group, or I guess, value graph, we like to call it, or ownership graph on chain, of people who are committed supporters of Pool Suite and want to be bought into the future of that project. And Marty has a number of different things that they're planning, and so I'll let him drive the narrative around what's actually coming out and when. But if we zoom out a little bit, I think a template we're seeing run quite often is that teams or communities are coming together, they're building some momentum, and then they're looking to generate some capital to be able to go and invest in the creation of whatever their mission is. And so Kraus House might be an example of this. Cabin DAO could be an example of this. Pool Suite could be an example of this, where they're using NFTs or they're using some sort of crowdfund as a mechanism to actually generate that capital that can then be used to pay people for work, designers, events, etc. And so one of the ways that we do that is through selling NFTs, and NFTs, again, represent that ownership graph that you can imagine at some point in the future, if product market is fit and there's momentum is growing and there's demand, that fungible tokens would be airdropped to those NFTs in the future. And I think Bored Ape Yacht Club is another great example of what this might look like, right? Where you see that there's such demand for this, and now you go, okay, well, how do we actually create the incentive layer for people to continue to grow this into what the worldwide brand and community that we think is truly possible, and airdropping tokens to community members, as we've seen through ENS or through Super Rare or any other number of community-driven projects. There's a ton of value to be unlocked there. So I think that's a game plan we're going to see run quite a bit over the next weeks, months, and years.
Right. And I think to your point is, I definitely, the fact that Bored Ape Yacht Club is issuing ERC20 tokens, will be airdropping them, I think kind of speaks to what the case that you're making, right? Is that it probably starts off as NFTs, you build that social graph layer, and then over time it's like, okay, well, how do we create those incentives within the community? And then ultimately kind of like exit to community, right? Because I know when I first was kind of, again, because I think about a lot of this in terms of myself, and if I were to create an NFT project or an ERC20 around myself, like how do I navigate that route, right? And I know we've had these conversations before, and one of my things with the ERC20 is like, until you exit to community, right, like that is like technically like a call option on my creativity and my career, right? And it's like there's almost like, until you get that exit to community, there's no like quote unquote like retirement, right? Like it's like if if everything's being driven by gmoney and the gmoney coin, until you have broad distribution, like it's really just driven by one person. But I think that's like to the point of like decentralization, a plan towards decentralization. So I'm curious as to what you've been seeing with regards to that.
Yeah, I think it's like, why I enjoy our conversations, and I think it's very clear that you have a long-term mindset here, is that you're not rushing into launching a token, even though you could and it would be very popular. And it's because you recognize that there is it's a commitment, right? Like this is, the blockchains never forget, and people put real money on the line here. And the last group of people, I mean, if you ever would want to have anybody sort of feel like they've been ripped off, but you sure as heck don't want your fans to feel like that. And I think that's the challenge with a lot of creator coins or social tokens that are around this idea of like the stock market for celebrity or for popularity, is that it creates this dynamic where, yeah, you're actually even more on the treadmill. You are not only worried about uploading content to the internet, but you're also trying to do things to make sure that your token price is high, because anybody who's launched a token knows that the messages that come into your DMs are, when moon, or I got to pay my mortgage, and it's just not a fun thing to be a part of. And so I think the idea of it being part of a broader community, or this exit to community piece, as sort of a good reason to launch a fungible token, I think makes a ton of sense. And again, it's where all of our focus is at Seed Club. We're not playing with in the personal token space or creator coin space. I think again, it is a nuanced discussion because you are building a media empire here, right? It's a nascent media empire, but that's what you're working on. And so, if we were to sit down, I think a conversation we've had a number of times is thinking like, I'd be less interested in the gmoney token as per your personality or your likeness, and a lot more interested in what is the media DAO that we're building around you and other folks who are building these sort of non-influencer crypto related accounts. And to me, that becomes an interesting Seed Club type project, and it becomes more problematic or more challenging, I think, with just doing your likeness. And I think I'm seeing a lot of talk again about social tokens representing, like what would a Kylie Jenner social token look like, or a Taylor Swift social token. And I just don't think that's it. I don't think any creator wants to be traded on the stock market. But I do think what's interesting is like what the fan clubs and or communities that are in and around those creators. And so we're working on a project right now that's a very well-known musician. And we're not tokenizing the musician, but they have a fan club that's very active and passionate. And so we're thinking through how do you empower that fan club with a token. And we're seeing that happen across the BTS world as well. And I think will be a pretty big movement in the next year.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, right? Like, I think that when a lot of people kind of come into the space, they're like, okay, how can I monetize? Like, what's the best and fastest way to monetize? And I know that exactly to your point is like, this is real money that people are investing. And like, if for somebody to come in here and like do a cash grab, or, like people have been like, oh, when gmoney token? I'm like, I really want to think it through. Like I can afford to wait. So I want to wait because I, like, to your point, is like everything's on chain forever. Right. And so you mess up and you could have the best intentions. You could even do it well with the best intentions, and, people might still find fault. So that to me has been one of those things I very much am watching creator coins and community tokens and all that stuff, because I think it's like super interesting, right? Like to what you just said, I don't think anybody necessarily wants their stock to be traded in real time, where it's like, oh, spotted paparazzi, like, Kylie Jenner does this, and then all of a sudden, like, the token tanks 20%, right? Like, I don't think anybody really wants that, right? But having that access to your fan base and being able to communicate directly with them, I think it's super powerful without all the middlemen, right? And I'm sure you can speak to that more than anybody about creators coming to you directly because that's what they want.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the like and subscribe version of Web3 is own my token or earn my token. And while I think we'll still see the power of Web2 social networks and platforms endure because they do such a great job at connecting people and distributing content and building that attention flywheel. The idea that the ownership or membership in a community can be represented by a token that is decentralized and trust minimized and owned by both the creator and by their fan base, and can be sort of directed across the internet, the metaverse, wherever those sort of next places to hang out are, I think is incredibly powerful. And of course, the value of what we've seen within the NFT space over the last year has been nothing but transformational. The idea that you can sell something to your fans who want to own it, to be a part of this thing, to collect a thing, to sort of show off as being a part of a community, to represent their early participation in something, is groundbreaking. And I think it's just that the test of time will prove that to be true. And the people who know this firsthand are people who are creating and who have been stuck in the hamster wheel of building on YouTube, or we're seeing a lot of music projects right now. So folks who have just been locked into these crazy, relationships with agents and management companies and record labels and publishers, and it's just this huge thing where they see pennies on every dollar that gets created, and then can go through a project like Songcamp, which is a project that we've backed since the early days, and mint an NFT with their friends and sell it for $30,000 and see that split automatically in between all the creators. It's just absolutely transformational. Now, obviously, I think that there's still a long way to go in all of this stuff, and we're still in the early days. And I think to your earlier point of taking your time, like there's just so many ways that tokens can be used to create really short-term false incentives. And I think we see it across the space right now. Those of us who've been through a few cycles can really, the top calls come in as you start to see people just aping into NFT projects or other tokens. And it's, I compare the idea of like what you need to do to build a valuable network, which I think communities are, is, get the fire burning strong and bright. And you can do that in two ways. One, you can do it with paper and gasoline and light the match. And of course, it's going to burn bright and get a lot of attention, but it's not going to last. And the other way to do that is to build the kindling up and continue to feed it, fire over the long term. And you have this sort of burning set of embers that are going to be, enduring any sort of drawback. And I think that's actually a very hard thing to do in a market like today. And that's the thing that we have to work very hard with our teams on, is thinking through, how do you get the right people on the bus? How do you make sure ownership and membership in the community is structured appropriately? Because it becomes very hard and maybe even impossible for people at a certain level, where if you have tens of millions of followers, it's very difficult to understand who are there because they truly care about your art or your creativity, about you as a person, versus who are there for the speculative participation. So all those things are complicated and challenging. But I think fundamentally, the shift that tokens have brought to individual creators and people who are just, how's value created on the internet? People coming together and doing things. That is community. The internet is about, that community values has been captured by platforms for so long. And now we have new tools that put that into the hands of DAOs, communities, or individuals. And, I think I just love seeing that, we're in this, I think, a lot of debate around the value of Web3 and NFTs and stuff like that. And I'm just shaking my head and laughing, because I think in time it will be proven out to be, most people will see it as transformational in the way that we do.
Right. Yeah, no, I listen, I agree. And I think that's why you and I have gotten along so well, and kind of seeing the world like to where it's going, and, what are the next steps to get there. I'm curious as to what your thought is, right? Because as we're getting, like it's really easy to grow, or I won't say easy. It is easier to grow organically. Like if, let's say, you're not famous, right? Like if you're like starting off and you start issuing NFTs and you're like, okay, well, my first fans who are here, they're like, there's not like no botting, there's no like mad rush to collect. And that will happen more organically, right? Like, let's say like I start a token, and then as I become more famous, the value goes up because the number of community members want to be part of it. But obviously, since this is a new technology, there will be like people that have, tons of celebrity or tons of influence that are like, hey, like I want to do this. What have you seen like to kind of help? Like, I mean, I was part of the Adidas drop, and I saw it firsthand, where there was no number of tokens that they could have issued where it wouldn't have sold out instantaneously, right?
Yeah.
Because there's just so much demand there, right? Because it's a worldwide brand that everybody knows. And like, the issue that we ran into when we were like trying to figure out the drop is like, you don't want it to be botted, right? But you want fair distribution. And like, there's a lot of these different things that kind of come into play. Like, what have you seen any solutions, or do you think anything that would work if, let's say, like a Kardashian came into the space and wanted to do something? Like, how would they possibly distribute as fairly as possible?
No, I think it's a huge challenge, and ultimately, like, the inflection point we're going to see in the space when decentralized identity is figured out, or at least adopted widely, I think is going to be massive. Maybe that's a big if, but I think that solves a lot of the underlying challenges and that we're talking about here. So yeah, first of all, I don't think there's a perfect solution here by any means, and I definitely think you have firsthand experience with that, being well intentioned, and also just seeing the amount of attention that can come in on these drops. A few things that we have done in the past to sort of mitigate that. For a lot of the larger creators or artists, we think about the speakeasy strategy. And so speakeasy is like, business at the front and then a little weird party in the back that hopefully will grow over time and maybe will eventually become the big weird party. That's the pharmacy. You're still doing your normal content. You're still creating everything regularly, but you're dropping breadcrumbs to give people who are most interested in Web3 or in sort of the token side of things to a place to come in, and then thinking very carefully through how we actually bring people into that community. So not being purely just based on token holdings or being broadly open, but seeing membership type applications or the like as a way of starting to see that initial community. And those initial first 500 people are really key. It sets the culture, and ultimately I think culture can sustain a community over time, but launching with just a large amount of people right away is kind of a challenge to build those cultural norms. Two, we've with Pool Suite held back 250, actually I think it was even more, but held back a large number of NFTs and distributed them to groups focused on bringing people into the Web3 community who aren't well represented, so non-white dudes basically, and had dropped a bunch of tokens to a whole host of other community DAOs focused on people of color, BIPOC, women, etc. And so the idea of being able to have that ownership base start off with a bunch more diversity, I think, was a big thing that Marty wanted to focus on, and I think it's done an exceptional job of. And so thinking through how you see that early community as owners prior to doing a launch is also a big strategy there. But yeah, as far as you get to the larger numbers, like that's why so many, when we started Seed Club, some of the comments that I got were like, why aren't you going after bigger artists? Why aren't you trying to launch bigger brands? And there's two things I would say to that. One, we don't do any business development. We're not in the market or in the business of trying to convince anybody to do a token for all the reasons that we talked about before. And two, like the Web3 is really about leverage, right? You don't need to have 10 million people in a Discord to go do cool things. 10 or 100 can do cool things. And building that strong fire, the ember is burning bright with a small number of people who are creating together and doing amazing things, I think is really the way we create the most amount of value. And so we've really focused on those types of communities that are building Web3 native, or at least are bringing a chunk of their communities over into start something from scratch or brand new, and having the most success with those. I know that doesn't quite answer your question, because I think the top end of that market is still so challenging. And it's also why I don't think that's it. Like when I hear about large artists coming into the space, I think they're going to be able to do all sorts of things with tokens, with NFTs, sell on song or catalog, or they're going to do interesting NFT drops or even community tokens. But I think these Web3 native brands, Bored Ape is another great example of this. These Web3 native brands are going to be the ones that endure. It's because they put the time and effort into building those tight bonds that when the market changes, as we know, always happens at some point, who's going to be left? Well, it's the people who feel like they're there for community. They're bought into the vision of this project that are going to sustain. And it's the top of the market, the general public, the people that are just chasing token prices that are not. And so it's a very easy sort of bet for us to make.
Right. And also, to take that one step further, it's going to be the Web3 native builders, right? Like if a celebrity comes into the space and the market turns, they're probably going to be like, oh, well, like, I wasn't really that committed to this anyway. Like, let's shelve that and go somewhere else. Whereas, us Web3 native people are like, well, this is when you build, right? Like when the times get tough. So I very much agree with that. I've been very, very thoughtful about how I've been trying to create those on-chain breadcrumbs, as you say. Like, I was knowing I was working with Adidas, 8 months ago, and knowing that this drop was a very strong possibility, I started issuing POAPs, for people that were like either events in real life or, people that were listening to the podcast. And I didn't tell people what they were for. I knew what they were for. Like it was for me building my organic community, not people that were sitting there trying to farm or be like, oh, there's going to be an airdrop or whatever. It's like, hey, like if you're a fan and you want to claim a POAP and you listen, you get rewarded. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me in the last couple of days being like, oh, that was, thank you for like that utility of a POAP, right? I didn't even expect that, but I was on the whitelist for Adidas because of that. So it's much easier to do it organically when you don't have a following and you're building it. And that to me is like something I think about a ton, is like, when the celebrities come into the space and they want to try to tokenize, it's just hard because there's just so much people that are just going to buy the hype.
Yeah, and I think like the breadcrumbs are that's exactly the way to do it. I think there are a number of creators. So we look at RAC, who did a community token, like a very early community token, and has done a number of experiments in the space. Not a massive audience, but he definitely had a large, and was a known quantity. What gave him the most power in launching that token was that he actually had data from people who were buying from his song, his Bandcamp, or buying merch, or supporting him on Patreon, going back 5, 6, 7, even longer number of years. And so, having that data can be another way of solving a lot of these challenges, where if you know that people have been subscribed to your membership site, or buying merch, etc., that you can use those data points as ways of dropping tokens to them and sort of seeding your community with people who have put skin in the game or supported you from day one. Right. The challenge is mostly celebrities or larger artists don't have that data. That data is owned by record labels or by Live Nation or who knows who. And again, just favors folks who have been somewhat independent. Now, I will say, like, I'm very, very excited about celebrities and folks with large followings coming into the space. I think there's a number of folks who are out there that are coming in for the right reasons. They're very excited. They're trying to do it right, and they're taking it slow. And so I think there's a ton of value that's going to come from folks with larger audiences stepping into the space. I think we always just need to be cautious of that, though, because the risk reward is large, right? The people do have the ability to to cash grab in a way that maybe you or I wouldn't. Well, you would now. You're so popular. You could cash grab if you want to, but maybe I wouldn't. But I think the folks that do it well and are focused on long term, and what's been surprising to me is seeing how many are actually very active in a number of these Web3 communities already, and are putting in the work, and they're there anonymously. And so they speak the language, they understand the culture, they want to come out and do something big and well. And I think that's going to be a big inflection point for our space as a whole.
Right. Yeah. And I think someone, when I think of, like, let's say in the past 12 months of like a big celebrity that has done it pretty well, I think Gary Vee's done a good job of being able to come in, create value, and just really like be interactive, right? Like he's been part of the space since he became public about it. So like I think like we're gonna be getting those blueprints for how like the right way for a celebrity to come into the spaces. But it's just I don't envy the position that they're in with regards to that, because I think taking money from fans, like, because it's like to that point of like dumping on your followers type thing that like people always talk about in crypto, is like, why would you want to dump on your most fervent follower, right? Like, that's like the antithesis of like, the artist, the creator fan relationship. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing you said about Gary, he's in there, right? He's active, and I think that's a big thing where the dividing line between people doing it well and not are like, are you in the community or are you not? And I think you don't have to be in the community, but you probably shouldn't launch a community token if that's going to be the key, way that you want to drive value. And so the idea of agencies or management companies doing these things, I think it's just not going to play out. But if you as a creator, a celebrity, regardless of the size of your audience, you're going to jump in and be an active builder, I think there's a ton of opportunity there.
Right. Yeah. And to that point, it's interesting because when I've had conversations with, let's say, management companies or a lot of like middlemen in the traditional sense, and they're like, yeah, we're trying to figure out, our strategy for Web3. And I'm like, you're in a really tough spot, right? Like, because you're the people that, everybody is trying to get rid of. So like, you have to be super creative, right? And you not only do you have to be super creative, but you also have to shed that image that your industry or your sector has had for a long period of time.
Yeah, well, I love that. I think this idea of like the hating on middlemen or middle persons, the middle layer is going to go out of vogue sooner than later. Like, it's not the fact that like record labels or agents or managers, they create a lot of value ultimately. The challenge is that the incentives are all misaligned and that the individual artists don't have any ownership stake in the record label. And so if they're creating a ton of value or create a lot of value early on for those businesses, they don't see any, they don't participate whatsoever. It's the same story around Uber, right? Like the first Uber driver created so much value for that organization and yet didn't get any equity in that network that he helped build. It's crazy. And so I think like not only, there's going to be room for, we're seeing DAOs step in to be like the middlemen in the space. And the ones that do it right will exit to community or at least give ownership to the people who they're supporting. If you come and launch a project within Seed Club, you become an owner of Seed Club. And that's essential. Like that's how we create long-term value in a network, because we have more nodes that are bought in and incentivized to co-create value together. And so if you're a record label or a publisher, the challenge, the big opportunity is how do you go give ownership away to the people creating the most amount of value in your community? The challenge is, investors and the organizational structure of those entities just probably won't allow it. So that's why we're so long on net new experiments, new revenue opportunities, new organizations. And I think we're in this hole in the market right now where crypto is still a gray area. There's lacking certainty across the board. And we have an opportunity as Web3 native builders to come in and really build enduring, large category defining organizations. And I think that window is open today, but it won't be open for forever. And I think we'll look back on this time period as a really exciting one for really trying to launch new types of organizations that define how we as individuals create value on the internet.
Right. Yeah. And I guess while we have on that topic of, let's say, gray areas, what are your thoughts on securities laws and social tokens and stuff like that? Because I don't know if there's necessarily that big of a gray area on there, but obviously when you deal in crypto, you have to worry about regulations in some way, shape, or form. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we, like many folks that are in the space, are looking forward to regulatory certainty or clarity. I think there's a big gap between the written laws and how they're being enforced, and so I think there's a number of ways that we advise our projects to help navigate that, and it's very much case dependent and dependent on the use case. As I said before, tokens can be used, whether they're NFTs or fungible tokens, can be made to look like securities or not securities in a number of different ways, and so we just want to be very thoughtful about how you design a token, how you distribute that token, and how you sort of communicate all of that. I think the risk profile again changes based on where you are in the world as well and where your community is. So unfortunately, there's not any sort of one size fits all path. I think we feel very confident in the sort of avenues we have to help DAOs and communities that are decentralized launch tokens, and I think that we'll be working towards a lot more certainty in the regulatory front. We're obviously seeing a number of large funds that are stepping in and trying to lead that discussion and show different types of organizations that will help these protocols or DAOs better interact with the real world and the legal world. So I'm pretty bullish on getting clarity there. For right now, these are very independent conversations that ultimately need to be had to be able to formulate the appropriate approach, and also understand the risk profile that the projects are taking. So I think the high level is, if you embed any token with a claim on revenue or assets, or you're selling these things, those are generally on the riskier side of things. And on the other side, if tokens represent access and membership and voting power in these communities on the internet, you're on the safer side of things. But not a lawyer, definitely not your lawyer, and definitely want to talk to those before you actually do launch something.
Not financial advice.
That as well, yes. Definitely that.
I mean, and so one thing I just thought of, I have seen more and more people kind of, I don't know if anybody's done it actually yet, but people using, let's say, either 721s, your standard NFTs, or 1155s, almost as voting, let's say voting blocks instead of an ERC20. Have you come across people like working on implementing that? And what are your thoughts on like the pros and cons of using something like that?
Yeah, I think Bright Moments Gallery is a great example of this. They started off with an ERC20 and quickly moved away from that. Bright Moments is an IRL gallery network. They're in LA and New York and Berlin, I think, starting spring next year. And they started issuing tokens through art blocks. And so, early on, you could have been walking down the Venice Boardwalk, saw the sign saying, "Have you heard of NFTs?" and walked in and gone through a live minting experience where you were given a token, you use that token and some gas to mint a crypto Venetian, which is issued on the Art Blocks platform, and you get this generative crypto Venetian. You choose your music, you walk out. It's this whole experience. Well, they've figured out that, well, if we want to actually go and build this network of art galleries around the world, what we can just do is launch 1,000 tokens, crypto New Yorkers, crypto Berliners in various areas, and that those tokens would then become the governance rights in this broader DAO, that as we go out to 9 different locations is the overall goal, plus initial Genesis team, you have 10,000 NFTs that represent voting power and say within this DAO. And so I think that's interesting. It actually kind of blurs the line between fungible and non-fungible, and in a certain way, if you zoom out a bit, where individuals are able to continue to acquire, earn, get access to NFTs in different locations, and can those NFTs could be held back in some way as well to reward work. But more importantly, the underlying mechanism is actually generating revenue for the DAO itself, and so you actually have this growing treasury that can be used to pay contributors. I think where it falls down and becomes more challenging is, like, how do you represent an ownership stake in that NFT network, right? And so you would have founding team members own 20 or 30% of these tokens early on, which would decrease as the number of tokens expand. But they're also holding, like, whether it's 200 or 20, individual NFTs. And so, you could even look at what the Chromie Squiggle is like, right? So what Eric did there was brilliant. Like, he stopped minting at 9,000 and then had this ability to mint new tokens, and as a way of pulling people into his community and rewarding people. Well, it's very different giving away a token when it's worth $200, $300, $400, $500 than when it's worth $5, $6, $7, $10, $20, $50,000. And so you don't have the sort of granular control or ability to reward effort or reward ownership in this network for the effort people are putting in, and that becomes slightly more complicated. So, I, again, am a big fan of fungible tokens for governance and that stake in the network. I think the experiment that Bright Moments is doing is very worthwhile and interesting, and I'm watching closely. And I think we'll see a number of other communities do that as well. The important thing here is we're still, I would say, we're in like the case studies, not templates phase of the space. Like, there is no one size fits all. I refuse to write the "here's how you launch a social token" post, because I don't think it's relevant to most people. And really, the highest value thing you can do is just start from first principles. What are you trying to do? Where are you trying to go? What are the tools that exist? How can you navigate the world as it is today? And where do you think it's going to go? And there's a lot of trade-offs that have to be made along the lines. And my hope, what we see through Seed Club, is just this number of different experiments. Like, I'm pretty sure that I'm wrong about a lot of what we're talking about here today. I just don't know exactly what. And so the way we figure that out is just having more smart, caring individuals that are here trying to build for the long term, and together we're going to get to a good answer.
Right. I agree. I think that, like, even, I mean, in crypto in broader terms, like, we're all learning, right? These are all experiments, and we're trying to figure out, what's the best incentive structure. And nobody has the answer, and anybody that claims to have the answer is somebody you definitely should not listen to, right? So I try to. I think one of my strengths is the fact that I'm humble enough to know that I can learn from anybody, no matter what their age is or what their background is or whatever. We all have experience to contribute. Sorry, go on.
That's why I'm the most bullish on communities as being like the way that we onboard the next tens of millions of people into the space. The fact, one of our biggest gifts that you and I have is that we have an amazing network of people around us that help us make sense of the world. Like truly everything could go away tomorrow and we still have those connections. We're going to make it,
Right.
And most people who are coming into the space don't have that. And more so they're being distracted by a whole lot of unnecessary stuff, whether it's dog coins going to the moon or, just like pump and dump NFT projects. That's what the majority of the general public sees. And so I think DAOs and communities are going to act as the customer service support, the sense-making networks for people coming on board into Web3. And, I saw somebody tweet the other day, I can't remember who it was, that was saying, the best way to bring people into Web3 is just to have them follow you around a conference and introduce them to as many interesting people as possible. Because once you see who are building and why they're building and the crazy passion people have, it's very hard not to, you see a different world of Web3. And I think that's what communities are going to help provide for individuals.
Right. Yeah. And I love everything that crypto has done for me in my life and the connections that it's helped me have. Like, you and I were chatting for months before we even met in person, but I definitely don't think there is any substitute for that human connection in person, right? Like it's, maybe we probably get there at some point with technology and VR and AR and stuff like that in the future. But to your point is like being able to go to these conferences and, hang out and grab a drink with somebody for even if it's like 15 or 20 minutes, you're going to learn so much, right? Through osmosis and meeting people and be like, oh, hey, meet this person. And, so many connections are made. And I get that a lot. I'm sure you get it as well, where people are like, oh my God, thank you for introducing me to this person. I'm like, oh yeah, like I didn't even think anything of it. Like, it was just like, you two were there and, I just introduced you. And, it ends up leading to like some sort of, life-changing stuff, right? I'm going to use this example where I just found out recently that I did a co-op in Bitcoin Miami back in June. And it was like basically you had to go there to physically claim it. And I wasn't actually at these events because I was still trying to figure out my pseudonymity at the time. And so I didn't want to be there at the actual event. But there were two guys that met there that ended up starting a hedge fund together and ended up starting a DAO together. And they met because they both were like hanging out, claiming the gmoney co-op. So like to that like community, I was like, wow, I'm like, I love hearing stories like that, right? Because these guys are now like, movers in the space and like they have a voice in the space. And like, that's the way the space grows is by, empowering people one by one. So community is the most important thing. I think we are in total agreement with that.
I think Bitcoin Miami was the first place we actually met in real life. And I think you had a pocket full of POAPs that we were talking about this exact thing on a rooftop there. So,
yeah. So, but yeah, I don't want to, I want to be cognizant of your time because I know you're super busy, but before I let you go, what is your favorite NFT right now or your favorite NFT of all time?
I mean, if I say anything other than the Chromie Squiggle, I think I would have a community full of pitchforks coming at me soon. I think we share our appreciation for what the Art Blocks world has done and for how Snowfro is in the world. And I think the Chromie Squiggles is just weird enough that it captures like the brilliance of both what Art Blocks is and what NFTs are in my mind. I was also on the founding crew for Squiggle DAO, which has just gone on to build an incredible community and large holding of squiggles and just raise a bunch of money and doing really cool things out in the world and excited to see the progress of that community. So yeah, the Chromie Squiggle is probably one of my top ones. But listen, I love, I do not spend any time chasing NFT drops right now. It's not, I just don't have the bandwidth to do it, but I'm still collecting NFTs and those are coming from the projects that we're helping to launch at Seed Club. And so I'm really excited to be able to look back in 20 or 30 years and see this collection that has just been building up organically through the support of amazing entrepreneurs and community leaders. And, reminding me of like the little bit of a role that we played and hopefully helping them change the world.
Right. Yeah. And so do you have any predictions for the NFT market in 22?
I saw Spencer Noon's tweet yesterday talking about how he thinks this is like the best time, the generational buying opportunity for NFTs. Listen, I think which I love. I mean, I love bullish news. It just gets me going. I'm really excited. Obviously, I'm very probably recklessly long the space generally. But it's because the closer I get to the people building, the more bullish I am in all the amazing things that are coming. At least some of them will work out, I'm sure. So I think we're going to continue to see a growth in the number of people who are realizing the opportunity that NFTs present. We're going to see a lot of novel new tools and platforms built to help unlock a lot of that value, both with the sort of DeFi integration of NFTs through the utility. I think we're going to see this interaction point between DAOs and NFTs continue to grow and get more nuanced, which I think is exciting. And as we talked about before, I think we're going to see a large number of artists, celebrities, large existing organizations come into the space and push it forward in its own unique ways. But I think what I'm most looking forward to is like the surprise, the NFT drop or the new NFT type or utility. I don't even know what it is. It's just going to spin up and catch it's, what is this next year's loot look like? Right. And what does the evolution of loot look like? I don't know. I think there's still so much innovation and surprise to come. And that's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, to your point, I think we're still so early, and all it takes, and this is why I love to try to bring as much diversity into the space and as many different perspectives, because you don't know where that spark of creativity comes from, that all of a sudden is like the blossoming of like a new, let's say, vertical within the space, right? And so like the more people you get involved, it's like you're outsourcing, you're decentralizing all this stuff that used to be in the power of like a few people in certain areas or parts of the world that control these things, right? So I think you and I are super bulled up about the same things. So,
well, and it's just amazing that like there was a time and place where you felt like you could have tabs on what's happening in the space, and that time and place is long gone. And so it's almost guaranteed that we are not looking in the right direction for the next innovation. And I hope I catch it early enough, but I'm pretty excited about it regardless.
Yeah, it's so fun. I'm sure you're in just as many Telegram groups as I am. And sometimes when I think I'm all caught up on things, I'm like, oh my God, people will mention something and I'll be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's like, but I mean, that's just the nature of the space. And it makes me happier, because it just means I think mainstream adoption is that much closer. So,
agreed.
But yeah, Jess, thank you for the time. I hope you have a happy holiday, happy New Year. And, I'm looking forward to everything you guys are working on next year.
Appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you and your growing, excited audience. And looking forward to your next NFT drop and maybe eventual social token drop.
Exactly. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening in.
Thanks.